Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. We are set to kick off at 2 o'clock. So thank you very much for joining us. If you could just put into the comments or the chat that you can hear us and the sound quality and the visuals is all okay, that would be brilliant. And yeah, as I say, we will kick off in the next couple of minutes. Okay, great. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. I'm joined today with Kyle Veach from Puffin Technology, who is going to talk us through current operations, the industry in general, technology, and what it takes to be an inspection drone operator. So thank you very much for Kyle for joining us.
Thanks, George. Hope everybody can hear me okay.
Yeah, if anybody does have any issues with sound quality, it's potentially comes down to sometimes you just need to refresh your screen and it will come straight back on. Thank you very much for just sticking that in the chat. But without further ado, we'll kick off. We'll do a quick introduction and then we'll get right into it. We'll show some great content. We'll have a look at a bit of a workflow as well, which has always been a real fan favorite essentially. So onto the first slide, a little bit onto copters. So if anybody is joining us for the first time and haven't really had a look into what copters do in general, we aim to essentially work with our customers, our clients, to offer a 360 drone solution. So we work very closely with our international partners from the likes of DJI, Parrot, Flyability, Wingtra, as well as many more, to offer you drone technology, drone training, the proper accreditation for the UK. So in this case, the CAA, the PFCO, soon to be something else, but currently the PFCO, the Permission for Commercial Operations. And we aim to do that while offering really good after sales care and just general advice and consultancy along the way. So from business solutions to actual business consultancy in some areas, which we have been rolling out over the last couple of years with great success. And if anybody has obviously come into any of our webinars or onto our seminars in the past, thanks for joining us again. You'll know exactly what we're capable of and what we're doing at the moment. Like I said, it is just a case of that 4-stage process, and especially in the industrial inspection and maintenance side of things, we look for a solution that's going to be matched to the customer and to the scenario. So taking into consideration exactly what you guys are looking to do, how we can best suit certain training to that, how we can best suit certain equipment, how we can maintain and keep your operations going and keep them as fluid as possible over the next couple of years, and how then essentially you can evolve your company depending on work, depending on winning new contracts, tenders, and how you can keep building your success within the business. Because if we're there to support you, that's where we get a great deal of satisfaction to know that our customers are really performing in the industry, really being successful with certain sectors, and making us look good essentially at the end of the day, as well as yourselves. So why use drone technology? This is a big question which has been on everyone's lips for the last sort of 5 to 10 years. In recent years, it's become abundantly obvious, but essentially it is that improvement of safety. You're not risking putting people on rope access as much. Obviously, there is still a time and a place for certain aspects of inspection, such as scaffolding, such as rope access, cherry pickers. That's potentially never going to go away. But as a safety installation or maintaining safety from the offset, then you obviously have to put something in that place that's going to keep the human in a safe vicinity. Moving on to reducing downtime, myself and Kyle were just speaking actually about certain sites which only have a couple of weeks of downtime before they have to be set back up again, and in that time it is a big rush to get in and inspect. And traditionally it would be done with scaffolding, which can take potentially a couple of days to actually set up. A drone could potentially take minutes to actually get to an area and inspect that vicinity, and that obviously leads to lowering costs. At the end of the day, you are going to be looking to benefit your customers and your clients in any way possible, but the big thing for them is going to be lowering costs. How can you do something cheaper than people have done before? How can you do something quicker while making a decent profit for your own business as well? Some of the industries currently using drones at the moment, obviously we've seen it up and down the country with the oil and gas sector, the likes of Cyberhawk, Texo, Iris. They're all taking drones and they are pushing them to the limits. Offshore and onshore power generation, we've seen EDF, Magnox, Sellafield all been adopting drones in the last couple of years and having some fantastic success. Actually got a really good case study on EDF coming out in the next couple of days, so keep your eyes peeled for that. That'll be going across all of our socials. Construction, likes of Balfour Beatty, the likes of Costain, BAM, got some really big successful companies from there. And even the companies who are using the contractors, they are having a lot of work done, because at the end of the day, it's that time-consuming element of manual labour, setting up construction, setting up scaffolding, doing the rope access, which is taking time. And especially in the industrial inspection industry, drones are really reducing that time and reducing those costs. Utilities, the big one that we saw essentially was the water industry, using it for a mixture of mapping, survey, inspection, and it's really tied together quite well. And then obviously you've got your maintenance as well, so home and property, site progressions, damage reports, heat loss indications. We've got a lot of different operations which are going on at the moment. So yeah, it's basically across all the boards, which is really given drone operators a large target to win work at. Some of our partners, we did mention on a couple of slides before, but the likes of Fleur, who do cutting edge, top of the range thermal cameras, Pix4D, which we will discuss later on in the webinar. They do mapping, so all your photogrammetry and mapping software, so you can create 3D models, point clouds. You've got your Wingtra, which is your fixed wing. And if you've seen anything on LinkedIn or on our website, it's the large orange looking machine, fantastic for doing large scale mapping, really in a league of its own. Obviously DJI, if you haven't heard of DJI, you haven't heard of drones. They've really pioneered and taken the industry by the scruff of its neck. We've got Parrot, which is really coming out with some cool and exciting technology at the moment. Flyability, a personal favorite of mine with the Elios, and then obviously LiDAR USA, something which has really progressed in the last 12 months. As I said, a mixture of all of those industries. We've got companies from Track, Oil and Gas, Veolia, Thames Water, EDF, Costain, and of course, Puffin Technology, which I am joined today with. So, Kyle, without further ado, I'll just introduce you again. Thanks for joining us. Kyle, if you just want to talk through a little bit about what you're currently doing, where you've sort of come from as well, we can get a good idea of where you are.
Thanks, George, and thanks everybody. So I was invited just to chat to you today. For I'll keep this down to 10 minutes, this piece, because I think the key here is questions and the interaction as we get in a little bit. So my company, Puffin Technology Limited, we've been trading for just over a year. And I've used drones for many years from a recreational perspective. And I actually originally did my PFCO because I was starting to sell a number of photographs on Getty Images and things like that. And I wanted to be absolutely legal if I was making money from drone-related activity. At the same time, I worked for Bureau Veritas, a big global test, inspect, certify business. And I introduced, amongst other technologies, drone technology into the UK a good few years ago. And I got to the point where I decided I wanted to combine what I'd done at Bureau Veritas with the sort of passion of the recreational side of drone and move into an engineer inspection world. So that was why I created Puffin Technology. Now we try and focus on a quite a tight space, and our core offering, if you like, is really engineering access solutions. And I'm typically, whenever I'm working on site, we're typically with another competent person, usually supplied by the client or from another company. And as I say, we're there to be essentially the eyes and ears of those inspectors and those engineers and technicians into areas that classically, as George said, either are almost impossible to get to, very, very costly to get to, or permitting requirements make it really quite awkward to get people into the confined space or up onto the roof space or whatever it is. Very often I'm working in sort of in manufacturing facilities, and we're looking in roof spaces. That's quite a typical job for our teams. And we might be looking at, in older establishments, we're looking at the pipe hangers and the ducting and the structural side of things, just to see what shape everything's in. And there I'd be using a confined space access drone. And again, it's where the shop floor is too crowded to get maybe a Mupe or a cherry picker in. A lot of these organizations over the years have had to really push their production lines to a state where they're turning out far more than they used to. And as a result, the shop floor with equipment has become quite crowded. Initially, I tried to avoid buying Helios 2. I spoke to Copters and George in particular about potentially investing on one, but for a small new company, the cost of the investment, the capital to invest against the demand that I had for that work, we just couldn't seem to make that work. And we went down the other route, and we looked at a number of cage type opportunities for the Mavics series of drones. And I have to say, there's some really cracking solutions out there for putting a cage around a DJI Mavic system. There's some really good ones. But for the work that we were trying to tap into, that solution wasn't going to work for us. And it was typically that the Mavic can't look up, and that even with the enterprise version of the Mavic, the lighting system, once you've got it fixed, it's fixed. And you can't, you're very limited as to, you have to land the drone and adjust the lighting back, at least in the systems I was looking at. And also, again, with some of the access that we were wanting to achieve, the Mavic cage system just wouldn't fit round the back, for example, of an overhead crane rail, which is up in the gods in a manufacturing facility. There's typically about 50 centimeters or so of space that you can get in round the back of those things. And a Mavic in a cage on that instance was just not going to cut it. But as I do want to stress, I think there's some cracking systems being developed by people for the Mavic. So we bit the bullet and we invested in a Helios 2. We've also invested in Matrice, so we operate Matrice 210s. The payload, the key thing for me on the payload with the Matrice, it can take essentially 3 payloads, 2 underneath or 1 on top. So again, we can get a camera on the top of the Matrice and look directly up, which is cracking for looking under bridges and things like that. Payloads we're using on the Matrice is Z30, so that's the nice 30 times optical zoom. XT2, so thermal camera, fantastic for often just searching for plant and equipment that's hot and shouldn't be hot. There are loads of use cases for thermal, but some of the simple ones are if you're on a quarry and you want to look at the water pumps, you can very quickly get a good indication of which ones are running hot, or if you had a spare half hour to do some maintenance, which one would you look at? And we also get a lot of use out of the Mavic Enterprise and the Mavic 2 Pro, a couple of great little systems. Just on things that I've found as I've been operating over time, I find you need a lot of software to reach your end goal. There's not one particular piece of software that works. So whether it's DJI Pilot, Pix4D Scan, Hammer Missions, I can sometimes use all 3 and more of those pieces of software to control the drone on a given job, as well as, for example, the embedded controllers for the Helios system, or just the systems for the Mavics. I've also found that I've invested in risk planning software. So I personally, we use Drone Cloud, which is a fantastic risk planning piece of software if you've not seen it. So a pretty much end-to-end solution, including tracking flight time on your drones and maintenance on your drones. So if anyone's doing that manually and finding it a bit of a chore, I'd certainly recommend having a look at Drone Cloud. And then you get on to some of the other things, the other costs for your business that quickly add up, whether it's your subscription to QuickBooks or something like that. And again, I'd stress that anybody that's running a small business, abandon the spreadsheet and move to something like QuickBooks that does your accounts for you. And then you've obviously got subscriptions to the likes of RPAS and DroneSafe, both of which that for this year I've certainly signed up for. Outputs that I'm giving my clients, it really varies. It depends on what system we've used, but typically it's anything from 3-dimensional models, site orthographs. The clients, big operational sites, love the orthograph of site because it's typically if they take you into the operations room at the beginning of the day, they'll show you an overhead photograph that was taken from a fixed-wing aircraft 10 years ago, and the first thing they'll say is, the site doesn't look like this, but, and they try and show you where they want you to operate. So good site overheads and orthographs are often very welcome from clients. We do a lot of our tagged photos and annotated back into the 3D models, which we use Pix4D for. It can be video and physical PDF type output. Last couple of minutes really, and then back to George. But my sort of first year learning, I just shared maybe 5 or 6 key points with you, one of which I really underestimated how long it takes to win work. So there's definitely the work is out there, but to go from inquiry to purchase order is significantly longer than I appreciated. Another thing that I've probably underestimated a little bit as well is that I reckon about 1 hour on site also requires about 1 hour in the office in preparation, support, post-processing, administration, and so on. And on that, I was on an outage last week, 6 days, and I've generated about 70 gigabytes of data. Now, just handling that level of data securely and safely and processing it and then destroying it when you're finished, is a lot of data to be moving. Even just emptying the memory cards at the end of a day, you know, you can be watching the wheels turn for quite a long period of time. On that outage, I reckon I probably did about 5 hours of Helios 2 flight time, and all of that is 4K video that doesn't necessarily need to be reviewed depending on the workflow we're using, but certainly needs to be stored whilst we're preparing the reports in case we need to refer back to it. I was just joking with George before there. There was one evening that last week I spent 2 hours with a toothbrush cleaning the Helios 2. We'd had it down a ducting system with a lime injection line on the side of it, and it was pretty dusty and cloudy in there, and it was raining when the drone came out, so the lime dust ended up getting wet. So this is one of the trials and tribulations, but cleaning the Helios is painful, especially with the toothbrush. And the other thing I'd say is, you know, the simple things like charging time for batteries. If I turn up to site, you know, I can be taking up to 30 batteries. It's drone batteries, it's controller batteries, it's two-way radio batteries, it's screen batteries, it's torches. It's just I seem to spend my life plugging stuff in and unplugging it when the green lights stop flashing. And the other thing, the last thing I'd sort of say on that really is having a good repeatable workflow is absolutely critical for what you're doing. Try and keep things as simple as possible. Try and reduce the amount of review that you're having to do on the data that you're acquiring. Our workflows include putting up inspection screens when we're working with teams of engineers. We try and do all of the engineering decisions on the fly, if you like. What I try and avoid at all costs is having an engineer having to review data that's come down, say, off the Helios 2 for a second time. So we try and make all those decisions on the fly and only use the data afterwards if there's a query or the transmission, because the transmission you're getting down off Helios 2 is about 1080p, so it's a good quality transmission. So you can see cracks, you can see weld pitting, you can see dust, you can see stuff. But if there's a specific query which we've marked as a point of interest, which is a nice little trick on the Helios, it does mean that when it lands, we can get the data off it and we can look at the video in its full 4K glory. But again, moving data while you're on site onto a laptop to view slows the whole process down. So having slick workflows is critical. And George, I think you're going to talk about that in a minute.
I appreciate you sort of going into a bit more info on each section. I mean, we are going to talk through a little bit on the workflow. I'll ask you some questions on software, because at the end of the day, I think what, especially myself, you know, people who are listening want to hear is, you know, obviously not give away too many of your deepest secrets on the company, but just have a look at, you know, some potential use cases of certain softwares. I know we were speaking about Pix4D before, so we will have a little look. But yeah, I mean, we'll crack on. And if anybody's got any questions, we'll ask Kyle. We'll try and answer them as quickly as possible. We are going to have a bit of a Q&A at the end, but if we don't get around to you, just send them in, and I can guarantee somebody, especially myself, will be emailing you back with a bit of a query. So yeah, as we said, drone inspection concept workflow. As you say, you want to make it as simple as possible, and I mean, this is where we tried at Copters, and we worked with when obviously we released Ava, which is our inspection software, just to make it as simple as possible. And I mean, to be honest, looking at that as 5 points, you can essentially, especially on the capturing of data, you know, you turn it into 3. It is essentially capture, classify, and create. I don't know if you've got any comments on this, Kyle, on what you would potentially put into place or what you would take out of there, just as a sort of a boots on the ground sort of view.
From my perspective, there's quite a sort of big difference between the survey and the inspection, and often I will do 2. We will survey the asset to build the model, and then we will then and that would be something that we would do independently of having a competent engineer. And then secondly, we would go over that asset with a fine tooth comb with the drone, and that's what I would classify as the inspection. And then we're using the model that we've created from the survey to then attach those defects onto that model to give you perspective in three-dimensional space. And we will also potentially add in the thermograph or the close-up photograph that we've taken of the defect into the model. So pretty similar to this, actually. And this can take an awful lot of time, and this is where you've really got to have your wits about you when you're on site to make sure that you know, especially if you're in a confined space, or you're in a GPS denied environment, you've got to know exactly where you were working to be able to tag the images correctly into models.
Yeah, so we'll go on to that. I've got a quick video to show, and I'll go on to this before I go back to the pre-flight, because I think pre-flight's also very important for anybody new getting into the industry, or anybody looking to even fly as a hobbyist. I think you've always got to make safety your priority. But just as you said there, Kyle, you know, you do an overview, and the application I've used at the bottom there is actually just using on an Inspire 2. It's pixel capture. So it's essentially, and what we've always sort of taught and preached in the past is map out the environment, and then you can go deeper. As Kyle says, you can get sort of your overview of the site, and then you can look deeper into the imagery. And just to sort of upload a quick video of that. So this is very similar. This was done actually by one of my colleagues, Jim Pick. And this is more on the survey side, but what you're able to do with this on the inspection point of view is, once you've got this information, any of those sort of points of interest that you see, and it is literally a point cloud that is then rendered to give imagery, any of those points are connected to potentially 80 to 100 different photos. So if you do see something that is a problem, or see something which is potentially a defect, you can then look to actually access those photos all at once. And that ties quite nicely into Ava, because when we get onto sort of the collection of data, we obviously mentioned that there's, you know, gigabytes and gigabytes of information which you're also having to store, annotate, and then essentially delete. If you have a way of put them all together, that's what you can do. So just before we do move on, I mean, Kyle, is that specifically, have you seen in the industry, or seen something which you've thought, wow, that's really useful that I've done? Because we've had people come back to us with horror stories about, I'm so glad that I managed to set up a second flight zone, an emergency landing area. Have you got any sort of interesting points you just want to add to this?
So recreationally, I often use the Altitude Angel app.
Yep.
Again, I've moved on a little bit with the tools I'm now using, but for anybody just wanting to put a drone in the air safely, I mean, there's loads, and I'm not endorsing things as such, but the Altitude Angel app is great for a good check of airspace and the surrounding area. But you know, you should have a workflow that you're doing a little bit more than just using the Altitude Angel app. From my perspective, so that we're able to record and create and manage our risk assessments in much more detail. As I say, we're using another product called Drone Cloud, which I believe is actually pulling the aviation mapping data from Altitude Angel, but just presents it in a very usable format, and you can have predefined templates in there to recreate and repeat risk assessments very quickly. So again, if that's something that you're on the lookout for, I would certainly have a look at those guys. There are others, but that's the one I settled on. I think you're on mute, George.
Altitude Angel is sort of a favourite of mine. Thanks for that. It's actually in my bookmarks. So, but yeah, drone safety, making sure, do your equipment checks. You obviously mentioned about batteries as well, making sure everything's charged up before you go out to site. I know I've been left red-faced sometimes when we've gone out and done a demo, and it's we've only had one set of batteries because the other have either discharged or haven't been charged recently. So it's just taking those little things and making sort of a checklist of your workflow, and as you say, making it as simple as possible but as thorough. Big thing about sort of the collection of data is making it repeatable. If you can do it once, you can emulate that for your customer, and you can do it again and again. And I think what Carl was trying to touch on the most was, yeah, it was difficult to get started with. It was difficult to get the right workflow in place. But I think we also mentioned that it's, once you've got it, and it's quite easy to replicate. We do have your video, Carl. We will show it just after these slides, and then we'll talk through. Carl's just brought a video from one of his recent jobs on the Helios 2, where he's gone into one of the ducts that he was talking about at the start of the show. So we'll play that. We'll let Carl just talk through it. If you've got any questions or you want to see any more from Carl, potentially about his services, all that information will be made available at the end of the webinar, and obviously send out in the email as well. But essentially, this is very similar to sort of the information you would find from your Helios 2, Carl. This is something I did up in a tank inspection up in South Shields, actually, and it was just a case of using the point of interest feature and going around and actually annotating sections that needed to be seen. So I did this with an inspection team. I flew, they inspected, and we did it from outside the tank. And this leads on to obviously doing measurements, identification, establishing the system is able to get to an area so you can inspect it, potentially using a number of batteries to do that, but it's the exploration, the identification, and then the reporting on it. So I will just play Kyle's video. So that should be coming up now. Let us know if you can't see that. So, Kyle, do you just want to talk through sort of what sort of areas you were actually tasked with inspecting?
Yeah, George, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Yeah, so we're there was a visual inspection of the ducting system. Very difficult to get into at height, probably about 8 meters off the ground. This section, this is just in one of the dropout boxes. And really, with the client just wanted to know what was going on inside, because it was one of those areas that were pretty difficult. Early on, you saw we were just looking at the baffles and dampers to make sure that the right ones were open and what have you. But this is classic territory for the likes of an Helios 2. It is very difficult to fly in a really confined space. You do sometimes tend to just bounce down in this case, bounce down the duct. I was hoping to have approval to use another video that we shot last week, but I haven't had that yet from the client, where we were inspecting a melter furnace and flying vertical in a very tight space to look at the refractory lining. And that was really to get up to the horizontal ducting above the furnace to validate that the ducting was clear from debris. Total flight time there was 3 minutes, compared to, frankly, you can't get to it to inspect it visually. No matter what you tried, you'd have to cut a hole in the ducting and stick your head in to have a look. So what's not clear on that video is actually I've modified my Helios slightly. So I've adjusted one of the pentagons at the bottom so that we can actually attach a rescue line, because the Helios is certainly not invincible, and I have got it stuck on a number of occasions, and I have quite a repertoire of rescue equipment to recover stuck Helioses, but and the most simple one is having a line on it to give it a tug, especially if you're doing refractory lining type inspection. I find that the surface of that is just like Velcro when it comes to the cage of the Helios, and it can just halfway up a duct, the Helios can just get stuck on the refractory lining, and just the tug on the rescue line gets it free, and you can carry on. I think
yeah, great insight. Actually, that's something a couple of customers have fed back to us. I mean, it's all on that pre-flight survey, making sure that your mission is adequate for the job at hand. So, thanks for letting us know that. I will touch quickly on. Obviously, you mentioned the Z30. This is a video that will show that I actually flew not so long ago, but essentially. So looking at a roof, basically. Let me have a look. So let me bring this up. But Carl, this is sort of the technology that you've been using for a while now, and having some really great success with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, first and foremost, the Z30 is a fantastic zoom lens, and just as it looks like it's just come into focus there. So there are many occasions where we're doing an asset inspection, and for whatever reason, maybe the area is zoned, and we can't put the drone too close to the asset. You know, we can be 40, 50 meters back from the asset and getting images very similar to what you're looking at here. The Z30 camera is an amazing piece of kit, and in the grand scheme of things, relatively cheap compared to other cameras. You know, it fits nicely on the Matrice series drone, amongst others. And you can, you know, your Matrice can have two payloads, so you can have something else next to the Z30. What you see is what you get with the Z30, though, I would stress. So if you're hoping for a good resolution that you can actually delve further into, you don't get that on the Z30. So you know, the pixel count's pretty low in the images, but nevertheless it serves the purpose you need.
Yeah, so that's a really good point you've actually put on there. I'm actually going to bring up the H20, which is DJI's latest camera. So obviously with the Z30, you're looking around about 4 megapixels on the actual sensor, but with the H20, they've actually increased it to 20. So even on the actual zoom capabilities of the camera, you're not losing any of the detail because it's optical anyway, but you're still getting a really high definition, high quality image. But yeah, as you say, the Z30 zoom, it is phenomenal. If you can't get too close to a building, you know, high winds are always an issue. Flying in certain areas, flying so that you can still see the drone, see it in line of sight. You've got to take all of these factors into account when actually flying a drone. And I mean, this was taken. And hopefully we'll be able to zoom out here. I think that's where the video goes. But this was a video that was created in the US, just testing the zoom capabilities.
There we go. So let's say I am a public safety agency,
and then obviously looking at
I'm trying to find a vehicle. There's a subject vehicle. We want to see where he's going, what he's doing.
Different car, more of a search and rescue police application, but still the application of the zoom is still, you know, widely renowned. I will just quickly go on to a bit of a side note on the collection of data. Obviously, this is a big talking point at the moment. We have a lot of inquiries about, you know, what's the best software to use? How are people in the industry currently capturing data? And I mean, something that we took on board quite quickly is the likes of Ava. Now, this is a reporting software which you upload all of your images, and because they are time stamped with both altitude, with GPS coordinates, angle of the camera, all of that information is stuck with the photos. So when you upload them into this software, it recognizes that information and then it plots it onto a map. So a bit like how Kyle was discussing how they went over and did a grid survey, and then they'll go in and do a closer inspection. This is exactly what's been done here with this demonstration. So essentially hundreds of photos have been taken. that it's been processed into, and I think it was used doing drone deploy with this rather than Pix4D for once, but drone deploy to create the 3D image. And then into that, we were able to see all of the photos that were taken and at what angle they were taken. So if you are looking for a certain defect, or you're looking to report to your maintenance team that there is an issue at this area, and instead of sending on a wild goose chase saying, you know, the large building on the south side, it's got a crack at 45 degrees east or something ridiculous, you can actually send them a relatively straightforward information breakdown. So you can even annotate it to say what sort of issue it is, where you'll find it, and have an overview of the actual GPS coordinate as well. So they should be able to understand and find that relatively easy. Now Ava is something that we've recently released. We are going to go into more information on that in terms of doing a walkthrough, a bit more of a webinar based application. But for the moment, it's something that we are sort of testing at the moment. Yeah, it's AVA, so that you can obviously you can find that on our website as well. And there it is. Yeah, so I'll bring Kyle back for the next sections. And yeah, we spoke about the Z30, but importance of camera. This is something which is really important to people. Obviously, not everybody can afford the top end phase one cameras, 50, 100 megapixel cameras. So it's finding a way of getting the information and collecting that data effectively. Here we've got a great illustration basically of the Z30 at normal zoom and then at 30 times. Is everybody still got the sound? I'm having a couple of people just saying that their sound's gone, but you may just have to refresh it. Yeah, sounds all good. Carl, you can still hear me?
Yeah.
Good stuff, good stuff. So going on, this is another use of the camera. This is actually the Z30. This is a phenomenal, sorry, this is the H20. This is a phenomenal inspection. Well, more of an application on the zoom. Apologies for the music. It wasn't my choice. It was taken from Aerial Influence. But they basically using the camera to actually identify something, which is, and it is just using it to show the power over a huge distance. As it says there, 42 miles, they're able to see it in the distance. So if you're looking to put that into an inspection category, you're actually able to, get really high quality detail from flying maybe 50, 100 meters away and still capture really high quality imagery. And that's obviously what we're trying to push at the moment with copters, is cutting top of the line equipment. Helios 2. Now, Carl, on your sort of the post-processing side, what are you finding works best when you're trying to capture images? Is it the point of interest and then diving into that and using it as sort of a expansion and like zooming into the photos, or is it trying to get as close to the image as like the target as possible?
So for those of you that aren't familiar with Helios 2, it's got a fixed focal length. It's got a 4K video camera. It does have a thermal camera, but the resolution is low, so it'll basically tell you if something's hot. But from my perspective, it's typically getting the sweet spot for the focus for Helios, I find, is about 20 centimeters away from the object. So whether you're looking at a weld or something, and the Helios 2 is pretty stable compared to its older Helios 1, which was a pretty erratic animal when you were trying to fly it. Helios 2 is pretty stable. On the controller, you've got a button that's just labeled POI, point of interest, and what that allows you to do in Pix4D Inspect, not Pix4D Inspect, Flyability's Inspector software is it allows you to go to that point in the video very, very quickly when you're skimming through it afterwards. But I must admit, when I'm working with competent engineers and we're looking at, say, crane rails, and we're looking at welded crane rails, or we're looking for loose bolts or whatever, we just do everything as much as we can on the fly, because landing and then reviewing footage afterwards it slows down the process considerably. But what we will do, if we find something of interest that we want to then use in a report, we'll point of interest it, and I'll pull out a screen grab image from the video as part of my post processing. I'm just sort of skimming some of the points that people have made. If there's no GPS, how do you know the GPS location? With Helios, you don't. So you've really got to have a workflow that works for you, so that 2 days later, if you're looking at that video image, that you've got some context around it. And one of the little tricks I always do, if I'm doing, say, like crane rails, for example, as well as when you start the flight, in the software you can label maybe which column you're starting at. So I typically do crane rail surveys between 2 columns, and then move along to the next 2 and the next 2. And in buildings such as that, the columns are always labeled. And then the other thing I always do, just before I start the task, when the drone's actually up at the right altitude for the crane rail, I'll typically spin it round so I can orientate myself with where I was in the factory or whatever, in case I've got a problem. Later on, my notes have failed me or something like that. And similarly, as you finish task, spin the drone round and fly it back to you before you spin it round again and land it, so that left is left and right is right. But that gives you a bit of context in what you're grabbing, so you know roughly where you are. You can work it out from the factory floor. But that's really all I ever use Helios for. What I will have is a inspection screen next to me, so the competent person is actually seeing the live feed in all its glory, and they're not leaning over my shoulder to look at my screen. And there's loads of solutions to do that. You can even broadcast it into a Teams meeting. I've done that, and I've had the competent person in Switzerland looking at the live feed from Helios. So there's loads of solutions. You just need to track them down. Depends what fits what you're trying to achieve.
With the Helios is a dual screen as well that can be transmitted, but as you say, it's based on a Samsung tablet, so you're able to use a magnitude of different applications. Moving on with the Helios 2, this is a great application which you may have seen here, there, and everywhere at the moment, just with a bit of an inspection of a duct. So the Helios 2 taking off. And as you said, it was interesting you said about the point of interest, and you just take a screen grab. Now that's obviously a great way of identifying something, but because the battery life you are limited to 10 minutes, you do have to go in and keep doing flight. And we will be doing actually a webinar on Thursday about mitigation of battery life. So how to get the most out of your batteries, how to complete a mission while maintaining a decent degree of safety and not going to lose the drone. And I know we mentioned it before, but it takes 3 minutes sometimes when the drone's in an area, and when you've got a drone beyond visual line of sight, it can be quite daunting. It can be quite sort of nerve-wracking for the pilot. Obviously, pilot stresses up. You can't see the drone like you can when you're flying a Matrice or a Mavic outside, and it always is that risk of potentially losing it, potentially getting it stuck on something. So making sure that your inspections internally are short and snappy, straight to the point, find what you need, back out, go a little bit further, back out, go a little bit further than that, back out. So the ability to screen grab is a good option as well, that you can make a bit of as you say, a point of interest to go back to.
This is exactly the sort of task, George, where I would literally, as you say, I'd have a rescue line on the drone to start with.
Yeah.
And I might just sort of pop in the front of that culvert, maybe 3 or 4 meters, just to be assessing what's going on. How is it behaving? Are those leaves going to cause me bother? So I could quite happily sacrifice a battery or two just on a bit of a trial run to see how things are doing. And you have got, you've got to be careful with the rescue line because it can cause you more bother than it actually saves. But certainly, you're not going to be able to get your drone back if you have a problem in here. You're going to be leaving it where it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we probably wouldn't recommend the rescue line for certain applications. Probably not something like this, because the worst case scenario is it gets snagged halfway and then you are actually not able to get it back. But for certain applications like your ducts, we've had people use them going into sewers where it's vertically down. It is a really good idea and a good innovation, essentially.
You've got to be dead careful because, as you say,
Yeah.
if it gets snagged, you're in more bother. Certainly for duct inspections, one of the things it can help with, it can help you locate it if you have to go looking for it.
So when you say obviously a line, I presume that you're meaning a fishing line rather than anything of.
I typically use stunt kite line.
Kite line, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Again, it just depends. The nature of what you're doing. Stunt kite line works well in certain applications. Paracord, it's a bit heavier, but actually it's less snaggy. So, and sometimes I don't use anything. There was an interesting point. Somebody questioned, has the Elios been drop tested? I've drop tested mine. I ended up getting it stuck. I'll just let George explain what's going on here, though, because this is a sort of an analysis of distance.
Yeah, so essentially it's using Pix4D, and I'll try and play this again. But essentially it is using all of the photos that it captures during the video, and then it puts it all into a 3D mesh using Pix4D, using dimensions, colors, shapes. And the way that Pix4D works, it's photogrammetry, and a big element of Pix4D is having, or photogrammetry in general, is having the GPS coordinate. So it always knows what it's looking at. But obviously with this, it doesn't use it, so it has to use different techniques. So it maybe take a little bit longer for the processing time, but essentially because you know the distance, the circumference of the tunnel, or the distance from one side to the other, you can actually estimate the length of the tunnel. And I'll play it again so everybody can see it in its full glory. But yeah, as we say, if you are looking for a bit more of an idea on distance, on length of potentially a fault that you have to get to, you can use this tool to create the model, and then you can actually get a full distance from it. So it does save people a lot of time. It does give people an idea, and especially if it's an investigation or an exploration mission, it does give people a lot of ideas of what is down there.
So, George, if I just pick up on a couple of the questions that have been.
Yeah, crack on, absolutely, yeah.
Just before we move on to a slightly different topic, but there's a question. Mark says, has the Elios been drop tested? I can actually vouch for the fact that I drop tested mine by accident. I got it stuck in the building geometry, and I powered it down, and I was off to get the rescue pole, and it dropped from about 10 meters and hit the deck. The good thing about that is that the cage is literally like a crumple zone. So although I lost a number of pentagons in the crash, and I damaged part of the mounting, the collision energy when it hits is actually quite low because it's literally like a beach ball. And there's a lot of user serviceable parts on the drone. Once you get your confidence, you can crack on and do a lot of repairs yourself. And then somebody else, I can't find the name, but asked if it was ATEX rated. Mark again, maybe. It's not ATEX rated. To my knowledge, George, you can correct me, but I don't believe there's any drone that's ATEX rated at the moment. Simply because one of the ATEX ratings is the skin of the drone needs to be cool, and the motors and the LED lights do get hot. I do work in those environments under the absolute guidance of the client and a hot work permit, which is typically the approach. I have no experience really of oil and gas, but I know There are a lot of organizations using these in oil and gas related applications, and I can only think they're doing a hot work permit scheme for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So exactly that hot work permit. Flyability recently, well, not recently, but this year released a really great article on intrinsically safe drones, and the be all and end all is we're still a good couple of years away from that, 5 to 10 years, depending on technologies. As you say, it's a very difficult task to do. But yeah, I think in terms of who are using it, I think it was actually the oil and gas industry, which were maybe one of the biggest pioneers when the Helios 1 first came out. But sort of moving on, and I do appreciate your insight into this. We were going to look a little bit at the Matrice 300 and a couple of different videos. But essentially, I think if anybody's got any questions to ask now to Kyle, I think this could be a really great opportunity. As I say, there will be sort of an information pack going out with all of the information. But just onto obviously software, you obviously mentioned sort of the pre-flight, post-flight. Are you using Pix4D? What are you finding works? What are you finding doesn't work? What's the big big tool you really rely on at the moment?
So for Helios, it's literally PDF. There's no,
Okay.
I don't do a great deal of photogrammetry, just the nature of what I do. For all the other inspections, I get a lot of use, and I nearly present all my work back using Pix4D. It's far superior, in my view, than the likes of Drone Deploy, simply because you can share stuff.
Yeah.
So Pix4D, whether that be Pix4D Desktop or now Pix4D Cloud Advance we're using, and recently working with Pix4D directly, using and testing some of their Pix4D Inspect, which is mind-blowingly good for complex lattice structures that previously you just couldn't model with photogrammetry, and you had to be relying probably on LiDAR. But Pix4D Inspect, the algorithms there for the photogrammetry builds and the point cloud builds, especially for complex structures, is phenomenally good. Really, really impressed with that. Yeah, that's. Shall I try and cover off some of these?
Well, yeah, I think a question that we do get sometimes is the Mavic series, the Mavic Dual, because you've got a Mavic, haven't you, Carl?
Yeah, so there's a place for Mavic in inspection. So we operate Mavic 2 Pro and Mavic Duals. The visible camera on the Mavic Enterprise isn't as good as on the pixel count is a little bit lower on the Mavic Enterprise compared with the Hasselblad lens that you've got on the Pro. Nice lightweight unit. So you know, compared to your Matrice when it's fully loaded, which is 6 kilos, your Mavic's 900 and the Enterprise 1.2 kg, I think. So certain environments where you're managing your risk, which is what it's all about, is those units are and systems are. There's certainly a place for them. Limited, because I think once you've had the luxury of a Matrice and a Z30 camera with an XT2 side by side, and you've got 30 times zoom, and you've got a 600 pixel infrared sensor as well, you know, you're pretty spoilt with those. And there are occasions where you might be trying to operate in an environment that's difficult. So you might have a building with a railway line down the side of it, which, you know, you can't go anywhere near network rail infrastructure. But there are ways of maybe operating from a field across the way when you've got the Z30, because you can really get close, even though you might be 70 or 80 meters away from the asset that you're looking at. It might be a quarry or something like that. But yeah, there's certainly a place for the Mavics, and at the end of the day, they've got great sensors on them.
Yeah, with specifically to Pix4D, I think the Mavic 2 Pro with the Hasselblad camera is probably sort of your lower end of getting good data quality. I don't know if you've used that within Pix4D to do any modeling.
So a lot of our modeling is done with we will do data acquisition with a Mavic 2 Pro. That works particularly well with another product from them called Pix4D Scan, which is the new controller system that goes hand in hand with Pix4D Inspect. If you're into this sort of thing, you really, get a trial license and give Pix4D Scan and Pix4D Inspect a go. The Pix4D Scan is the controller software that they've developed that goes hand in hand with Inspect, and at the moment I think it only works with Phantom Pro and with Mavic 2 Pro. So you are limited, but again, you're looking at your workflows, and you might be building a model of a 5G cell tower. So you're not inspecting it, you're surveying it. If you want to then go back and inspect it, you use a different drone with a different camera. So it's about deploying the right kit depending on what you're trying to achieve. And often you might end up throwing all your kit at one job to do the different parts of that job.
Absolutely. Great answer. Great answer. Yeah, see if we've got any more. More questions?
Track machine. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Larry. I just don't have one of them. The ducts are. The problem is they're very difficult to get up to. So you're using cherry pickers to get up to them. But I've actually been looking at a magnetic tracked system for future duct inspection. But this is the first time we've done that with this. And it's been very insightful for the client, and I've learned a lot doing it. It's horrendously stressful when you've got an expensive piece of kit beyond line of sight in a duct, and you can't remember which way is out. There was a question there about, can you see, how do you get on with the dust? Sometimes there's so much dust that it's like flying in a bag of icing sugar. You just really cannot see. And that, again, in those circumstances, for me, is where a rescue line is helpful, because you can see which way it's hanging often. I stress rescue lines you've got to be so careful with, because they can cause more bother than they solve, but they can certainly help you find your way out. It's a bit like the Hansel and Gretel breadcrumb thing.
Brilliant. On range, Carl, because this is a question we get quite often. What are you finding sort of as your standard range? So obviously with that duct video, it was kind of in quite close proximity. Are you ever in those scenarios, because it is beyond visual line of sight, are you ever finding that you are losing signal, or you are potentially losing your transmission?
Again, it's that risk-based approach. So don't just dive in and try and do the whole duct. See the behavior, and in certain cases, it's sacrifice a battery on purely a trial flight. I typically find with a duct, which is disappearing either out a building or into a building, you can comfortably get about 30 to 50 meters along it. And remember, when you're flying a tight duct, you can be bouncing around as well. So, and you've got that constraint of your 10-minute battery. So I can comfortably get, without the range extender, which I don't have, I'm comfortable up to about 30 to 50 meters. What you find is that your feed suffers before your controller quality signal suffers. So the moment you're losing the video quality on your controller, that is the time to turn around, because you've still got the controllability of the drone, but only just. So that's your time to back off and find another way in, or move, or something like that.
Brilliant. Great answer. Great answer. I think if you've got any questions you want to answer quickly now, before we sort of sign off, we'll leave it at that. But all of the questions that you can post to the bottom, keep firing them in. We will go over them and we'll get you an answer out. Something which obviously has been asked of us quite often in the last couple of months is for a bit of a consultancy slot, a bit of one-to-one. Instead of answering a question on a webinar, you can shoot me an email, george.burne@copters.com. That should be, and first 10 get a free consulting. So it's about an hour long. We can just look at sort of your application, what you're potentially looking at. But if that's everything with questions, Kyle, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. I hope everybody's enjoyed the questions that we've answered, sort of a bit of more of an insight into what Puffin are currently doing, what they plan to do in the future. But what final word, Kyle?
By all means, yeah. Thanks everybody for listening. If there's any questions, I'm just scanning. There's a number that we've not had a chance. Fire them in, and I'll certainly try and make a point of getting an answer. But hopefully it's been insightful for you guys, and yeah, be nice to come back again sometime soon and tell you what else we're doing.
I'm sure we'll have you back. But no, thanks very much for joining us. As always, shoot us some questions, contact us via email, via the phone, and like us on social media. But thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.